Right then. So, through the wonder of technology, Dr. Steve Shirtliffe from the University of Saskatchewan is joining us on remote sensing for crop agronomy, more than pretty pictures. Steve Shirtliffe grew up on a farm in Manitoba, and then in the 90s returned to the University of Manitoba for his PhD. Since then, he has been a professor in the Department of Plant Sciences at the University of Saskatchewan. His position involves teaching, research, and extension in the areas of crop imaging and agronomy. Past and current research projects have focused on phenotypic and agronomic applications of crop imaging using UAV and satellite imagery. He has a wide range of interests and collaborates widely with computer scientists, plant breeders, geographers, economists, soil scientists, and engineers to form dynamic research groups to tackle interdisciplinary problems. Everyone, Steve.
Okay, well, hello everybody, and I hope everything's going well there. I can't hear audio from your end, so I'm kind of going on faith, but if something's happening you can't hear me, I'll keep an eye on my chat box to see that. So today I'd like to thank you guys for welcoming me there. I'm sorry I can't be there. I came down with a fire truck of a cold yesterday, and yeah, I'm just happy not to be flying and driving and that stuff. So anyways, today we're going to talk about some work that we've been doing here at the University of Saskatchewan with a couple of colleagues in my lab and some graduate students, Hansini Fernandez, Van Steenbergen, Tuan Han, Kwabena Nikedia. And what we've been doing is using crop imagery. What we're doing is we know there's been around crop imagery for quite a while with satellites. We're trying, I'm an agronomist. I come from the world of agronomy. And what I want to do is to try to find ways to help us manage our land better with this, all this data and all this imagery. And what I'm going to do today is give you a sample of what we kind of do. This isn't everything that we're working on. We have a pretty large research program now, but we'll give you a sample, and then we'll kind of talk about where we're going to go in the future. But let's just... So if we look at the wheat yield in Saskatchewan, and I apologize, this slide is for Saskatchewan because we use Saskatchewan rural municipality yields. We could have done it for Alberta, but Alberta, your data is on a larger scale because your townships are much larger than our rural municipalities. But if we look at yield over time, we see a couple things happening. This is wheat yield ranging from, about in 10 bushels per acre to greater than 60. We see a trend in going up in time, but we also see that there's a substantial variation between years. There's good years and there's bad years. You're seeing some go by. And there's also within the province, there's variability as well between RMs. And that's going to happen actually between fields as well, and even within fields where we are focusing. A lot of that difference on the regional basis is due to our differences in precipitation across the prairies. And here are some where we've taken quite a granular data source of predicted precipitation and mapped it across Western Canada. One of the reasons I did this, I went to Australia a couple winters ago, and everywhere I went, every farmer knew exactly how much their average growing season precipitation was. In Canada, do we have that data? No. So I went back and we kind of recreated as best we could. And you can see here some of the trends that we're all well know about, that we do vary a lot our growing season precipitation, from, down in southeastern Alberta and southwestern Saskatchewan, where we're under 200 mils growing season a year, to, up into, the area east of Winnipeg that gets over 400 mils a year, which would be, 400 millimeters. That's, that's 12 plus 5, that's 17 inches, or is that 20 inches? 20 inches a year. But anyways, so you can see that varies. There's also the other side of it as far as environment that drives it is heat. And this is really important in crops like canola that are prone to pollen sterility, flower sterility during the season. And you can see we mapped that out here. We see that the areas, I don't know if you can see my, maybe I'll click on here's a laser pointer. If you look up in the areas of the black soil zone, and in the areas up into the Peace River Valley, we see that we almost never get days in July above 30 degrees Celsius. It's quite rare, but as we get down into southern Alberta and Saskatchewan, it's quite common. And obviously that is something that can limit our canola yield as well. Crop imagery, that's the main topic of today, what we're going to talk about. We're going to be looking at remote sense using UAVs and satellites. And the key idea here is I titled it as more than just pretty pictures. You know, we've known for years, if you look, there's a yield map in the center of the top one there that's showing it. We've had yield maps for a long time. We can get satellite maps of average NDVI that can end up being quite close to that. So we know that NDVI can be a good predictor. There's here we have the topography of that field. This is actually from a class that I'm going to be teaching. The students are going to be doing this in a couple of weeks from now after break. But you can see that we can get an idea of what's kind of driving that. Is there ways that we can manage this within field variability and ways that we can quantify it? I'm not going to talk about plant breeding genetics today, but we're going to talk about optimizing crop management through spatially and in a spatially and temporally variable environment. I think I've established that we have a highly variable environment. And what our main goal is we want to provide tools and timely information for farmers and agronomists and the industry to help us do a better job, because what we're hoping to do is to be able to produce more with less inputs, and so essentially we can have a win-win situation. This all started a few years ago when I bought a UAV, and I ended up getting involved in a large research project because I was the guy with the UAV. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And there was a large research grant that went in from the University of Saskatchewan. And we ended up doing some work with plant breeders. And I continue this work to this day, but I'm not going to talk much about it. But I leave it in here because this is where we started from. And T. Zhang was a PhD student of mine. And she looked at flowering in canola here using a UAV. And what we found is what we were looking for, and this was driven by intuition. I knew that, you know, from being growing up on a farm, being around canola my whole life, that the years when canola blooms for a long time, and there's a lot of blooms out there, and it's a cool year, you get that long blooming period. Those are the years that the canola seems to really do well. You seem to get a lot of pods, obviously, because each flower can make a pod, and those pods can have seeds in them, right? So what T did is she used a UAV and essentially pulled out the yellow information of that and quantified the phenology of flowering over time. And what she was able to do was to be able to correlate that with yield, and she got some reasonable results with that. We took that. After that, we had a graduate student of mine, Hansini Fernando, who looked at this using satellite imagery in fields in Saskatchewan. We were looking at the yields on a subfield basis. I don't know if you can see my pointer here, where the yield is, where you can see differences in flowering within the field. So we were trying to see, can this predict the yield within the field? So again, using this, and yellow blooms are great for satellite imagery because you can see from space where canola is. So she did this. We partnered with Croptomistic on this, and they shared some yield maps from farmers that we had. And she used planet imagery, which is a commercial satellite with about a 4-meter ground resolution. So we did that over time. She trained a machine learning model to predict the yield, and she got some reasonable results. She got an R-squared of about 0.68. It wasn't a perfect linear relationship, but she showed that we just using blooms alone, nothing else. We used blooming and some soil measures, but we didn't use any other imagery. We only used imagery during blooming that were able to predict the yield on other fields than the one we had measured there. So we thought, well, we're on to something with that. We're establishing that we can predict some yield. Right now, Hansini has started a PhD. One of the issues with visible satellite imagery, and you're seeing them there, is clouds. It's not perfectly sunny every day. You know, you guys are in sunny Alberta. I'm in sunny Saskatchewan, sunny Manitoba. We're sunny, but at least about 40% of the time for much of the prairies. And as you get further up into the black soil zone, it's even higher. There's clouds that are blocking out our view. And so you can see you don't get an image every day. On the bottom here, though, we're seeing something else. These are radar satellite. These are satellites that actually don't sense visible light. They actually sense radar waves. So they actually send radar waves towards the Earth, and they pick up the reflections of them. What you'll notice over time is that if we look at this bottom one here, as we're given a false color representation, is that the fields start to change a fair bit there. What radar is really good at is detecting structural differences in the crop canopy. You can see here it all lit up and it's lighting up where all the canola fields are. And it's kind of, and as you can see, as they dry down, they shrink there as well. So we can get a lot of information from radar. And here you see a radar index here on the bottom. And that's what Hanseny is doing. She's using this to actually understand when canola starts to bloom, when it reaches peak, when it starts to dry out. She's actually, when it bolts, she's using this radar imagery to track canola development over time and to use it in predicting yield and to use it so we know when it's flowering, if there's events like heat events and stuff like that to help us in modeling our canola yield. So that's one other thing we're doing. We're also still using UAVs at a field scale. This is a project we're doing with Jap Sandhu, who's a master's student that's just finishing up with us. We all know that kochia is a terrible weed in the Canadian prairies. And here we see a kochia patch. And the top one growing in a lentil field is particularly bad in lentil because there's no in-crop herbicides that can take it out. But even in wheat, we can see it fairly often. You can see it often is associated with saline areas around sloughs. And on the bottom here, even in canola, even with our herbicide tolerant canola, it doesn't really matter if it's glyphosate tolerant because a lot of our kochia has evolved resistance to it. And you can see it growing well here. And there's canola, and in fact, it's so saline here that it's too saline even for the kochia to grow. So we want to see if we could use UAVs to detect the canola, to detect the kochia in the fields over time. And our first part of this was Jap went out with these Quantex UAV, and you can see here it takes off vertically, and then it gets up a ways, and it turns sideways, and then it flies like an airplane. It actually looks like Luke Skywalker's X-Wing fighter zooming back and forth across the field. And it can do a quarter section in, I think, about 40 minutes from beginning to end. And so so Jap was out there. He went out to farmers' fields. And flew this drone and brought it back and did the imagery on it. And he was able to he's kind of highlighted where the kochia patch is here. And you can see as you get later in the season, the kochia becomes more prominent because the crop starts drying down and the kochia stays green. So that difference in timing of development, or what we call phenology, was key here. This farmer actually went out and cut the kochia after it went to seed to stop it from spreading, which is a great idea, but not great for our imagery, but we use this one in this case here to do it. So what Jap did was he went out and he figured out ways to essentially map the kochia from the rest of the field, and he was able to just use good old NDVI. And NDVI is an index that uses a band called near infrared. Our eyes can't see near infrared, but plants reflect about 40 to 50% of the incoming near infrared gets reflected back at us. Only about 5 to 10% of the visible light gets reflected back, and soil hardly reflects any near infrared. So if you have a lot of near infrared being reflected, and that's part of NDVI, that tells us that there's plants there. So the near infrared tells us that there's plants growing there. This is from later when the crop's drying down, so we can clearly see where the kochia is there. What we use this UAV imagery for is not to fly a UAV over every field that's available. We want to use the UAV imagery to actually train a model to allow us to use satellites to satellite imagery to see the kochia, because satellite imagery, especially that from Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, and Landsat, the great thing about it is free. The Europeans give away all the Sentinel information, and the Americans give away the Landsat information. At least they do for now. We'll see what happens in that. Hopefully nobody tells somebody about that. Anyway, so that information is free to us. So if we can use this information, if we know where it's kochia and we can train it up using a satellite imagery and a machine learning model here, it's a form of artificial intelligence, we can use it to predict where the kochia is. And so we're using in the satellite imagery to give you an idea of what we're using. Here's the UAV data. You can see the green spots are showing where the kochia is. if we look at the kind of the harmonic NDVI, that's showing us that the kochia stays greener over time. We can pick out individual images of NDVI of that as well. And we can feed all that information into a computer that then uses, if it knows where the UAV, if it knows where the kochia is, it can predict using the multiple layers of the other one where it is. And here's some other information, other layers we've used, including NDVI, a water index. Sometimes we use another band we can't see called shortwave infrared. This is really good. The satellites use all detect this band, but this band is really good at detecting where there is wetness, whether it be soil wetness or wetness from the crop vegetation. If we put all those together in a machine learning model in the Google Earth Engine. So the Google Earth Engine is how we get our imagery down. As we use this, Google Earth Engine is from the company Google, and what they've done is Google has gone and essentially downloaded all the freely available satellite and remote sensing information that exists out there and they leave it on this platform that you can explore and process. So what we do is we use the Google Earth Engine to pre-process data, then we download it here. And it's relatively simple. Even an old guy like me has learned how to program in it. For example, this one here, I'm asking it to give from Copernicus Sentinel-2 to filter between 2016 and 2022 for the months of June, July, and August. Get rid of the cloudy pixels. And I'm asking it to make a map of NDVI and show me the average map over that time. And so you can do that. You can even do some machine learning in it, although we pull the data down most of the time to do the machine learning. Well, what happens when we did the machine learning on this? This is our UAV images here on the left, and I hope you can see my pointer. If somebody could confirm that you can see my pointer, then I'll know I should keep using it in the text box. And here you can see in the light red beside it, where this is where the model predicted there to be kochia. And you can see it's pretty good. It's predicting that there is some kochia here where there isn't, but it's about 85% accurate. And again, in this one, it's doing a pretty good job as well. This is our first try at it. We've actually started using some other satellite imagery now to train with. We've purchased some high resolution satellite imagery that is down to 30 centimeter pixel. And we're using that to train the model. And this has become quite good. Is giving us quite good results. We're using leave one field out cross-validation. So when we train on a field, if we know that there's kochia here, we don't get the model. We don't validate on the data where we already know it is. We take that field out and use another field to train a model to predict this field, just to ensure that our models are robust, that we're not just interpolating within that field, that we can actually predicting. You can see we're doing a good job. We're doing this. We're hoping to get some more funding. What we'd like to do is to do this wall to wall across Western Canada, so that we can get a good idea where kochia is. And this could of course facilitate patch management of kochia and allow us to know how much it is, how much is out there, and to facilitate the patch management. We've also worked in the soil area, and you can see here where this is. We've partnered with Croptomistic. They shared some EM38 apparent electrical conductivity maps with us. So some EC maps that range from 0.17 to 4.8 decisiemens. So across, and you can see here the red areas are areas that would probably be saline. And you can see here, so areas, anything over about 1 on this would be getting into the saline area, where it would affect sensitive crops like pulses. If you're even at 1.5, that would even be affecting cereals and canola. So we can see we have some salinity here. We did the same thing with this map. We trained up. We used the EC map that Croptomistic shared with us, and we trained up a map with satellite imagery, and we used it to predict salinity, an EC prediction map using a machine learning map and a bunch of satellite data. and a digital elevation maps, so the topography maps of the area. And using that, you can see here, here's our results in the ensemble model. You can see we're getting very good prediction value. These are for fields that are relatively close for each other. We've validated using this leave one field out approach. So this is our ground survey of the salinity. You can see here where blue is non-saline and getting up to yellow and red. Red especially is where it's starting. Dark yellow and red is where it's saline. And where we predicted it to be, not using this field, only using other fields, you can see we're getting a reasonably good prediction. And this is using mostly satellite imagery. And again, you can see these here. They're not quite as high resolution as doing a ground survey, but they're still pretty darn good. For not having actually, this is not using that machine in this field to actually predict it. We can then take this land, this is the area we did here, and scale this up to a larger area using this model to predict salinity across a larger area. You can see it's not perfect. There's some fields over here in the upper right-hand corner that they're showing all highly saline. That's not it. It's just doing, because of whatever crop was growing in there, it's predicting it incorrectly. So it's not 100%, but it does give us a reasonable kind of qualitative answer, especially when you're closer to where these predictions have been made. So we're hoping to expand this one too with in the future by having farmers be able to upload salinity maps and to be able to predict salinity on other parts of their farm. And here you can see, showing where salinity is predicted, and indeed, it does kind of follow where we would expect salinity to be, in our kind of classic, you can see this classic bathtub ring salinity around areas here. This is typically what we tend to see. Part of this may be that the satellite, that they're actually using kochia as an indicator of it as well, but there's also just the weightness of the soil surface and the lack of crop vegetation as well would come into that to help the model predict where areas where salinity. It can't actually, the satellites, it's an important thing to mention here, the satellites can't see into the soil. There's no way they can measure the conductivity directly. So they're measuring parameters that are associated with salinity in this case. We've also put together data that we've had from that we've used from others and to develop apps for farmers. We've put together with the pulse growers, we've put together this Aphanomyces risk evaluation app. We all know Aphanomyces, or many of us know that if we grow pulses, if we grow a lot of pulses in rotation, and I'm speaking specifically about lentils and pea here, that we can get a buildup of root rot in the soil because it occurs naturally, and when the years are wet, the root rot builds up. We can't measure Aphanomyces from in the roots from soil. We can see it through the crop not growing well, but we do know, because of work that's been done, that it's highly dependent upon your crop rotation, how frequently you grow pulses in rotation, and how long it's been since the last time you grew pulses, as well as how wet it was when you did grow those pulses. Those wet years are the years that the root rot sets in and do that. So that's the information we use in this one. We used information from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Every year for the past 15 or 16 years, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has been publishing a map of what crops are predicted to grow on 30-meter pixels for all of Canada. There's publicly available data. They use satellite data to train a model to train a machine learning model to predict where the crops are. It's about at least 90% accurate. With crops like canola, it's at least 95% or higher accurate. So we use that data and we put together a map. And here you'll see kind of the base layer there. So these are fields kind of in the pulse growing area of Saskatchewan. And you can see the ones that are red or yellow to orange are the ones that have had more lentils or peas growing in rotation. The ones that are green to light green haven't had any. The ones that are white, or the ones that are white, haven't had any peas or lentils within that specific rotation. I should mention, if you're interested in this app, you can scan the screen here, and this will provide a link to it as well. So what you do in this map is is you get this, you find this for an area, and then you click on the point thing here, and you get a point. And you can see in this case, we would have clicked probably one of the orange or red crops. So it gives you the history of the field. We haven't updated it for, this is an older slide, so we don't have the 2024 date, 2023 data in there yet. But you can see in this field, it's been basically lentil every second year forever, lentil, wheat. I'm guessing it's probably a lentil durum rotation, quite a common rotation in many areas. Based on this information, on the fact of how often lentil was growing and on the precipitation, we're saying that this is a high risk of Aphanomyces root rot. We're not saying, we don't know for certain. We're saying you should probably not seed it. You could test it, but realistically, if there's a high opportunity of there being Aphanomyces. If we click on another field, one that's not so bad, this one would have a moderate risk. You can see here it's had crops, lentils growing twice in the rotation. This one year in 2016, though, it was pretty wet. So that could have built up the inoculum. We know that from work of Shama Chatterton down there in Lethbridge, where you guys are. Maybe she's in the audience right now. If you are, a good colleague of mine, shout out to her. But anyways, that it can stay in the fields for probably at least 8 years and maybe 10 years. So this is probably still causing a risk of Aphanomyces in that field. So that's why it's yellow, and maybe soil test the field for Aphanomyces. So that's one of the things we built. I'm going to get us now into kind of our final project, what the big one that this lab is working at. What I'm really interested in is quantifying and understanding what's causing within field differences in crop yield. We know that there's from yield maps and from information that fields do vary in terms of their yield within each individual field over time. This project here we're looking at with Paul Galpern of the University of Calgary, as well as Christine Morsey and Tristan Scarlin, is we're looking to identify submarginal areas of the fields and areas that are very low yielding and rarely return a profit. Because we think there may be a win-win situation here for farmers. We're not out there to try to tell farmers what they should do, but what we're trying to do is to try to say, hey, these are areas we think might be low yielding and might not be profitable. You might want to consider first doing something about that area. And if you can't do anything about it and you're losing money every year, maybe you should think of another management plan for them. And here's some of the information. If we just look at kind of some of our long-term NDVIs, you can see there's areas, and we look at the base layer across this area, you can see areas. This is probably salinity here, the way we see these patterns along this creek. And we can see that we can see this in the long-term satellite imagery. And so what we're doing is building, and we're just finishing up the first phase of this project, building up the Prairie Precision Sustainability Network. We've built a network of growers that are sharing yield maps with us. We started off in these 7 areas, and where farmers are sharing yield maps with us. We've had many farmers. I have some numbers in a sec, but Andrea Ashford and Tamara have worked with farmers, and we've been getting a lot of progressive farmers have been sharing yield data with us. When we share the yield data, it never leaves secure university computers, and we use it to train models. We never show anybody the yield data. So this is where we've gotten yield data. This is actually about a year old, so we've gotten yield data over a larger area. Every one of those dots represents at least one field. And what we've done, we've had over 60 farms. I think we're closer to 80 to 90 farms now, and we're almost over 1 million acres from Saskatchewan and Alberta and now Manitoba. By looking at those fields individually on the yield maps, although yield maps are never perfect, we can identify areas that are consistently low yielding. And consistency is important. We want to know if an area of a field is low yielding in 1 year, it doesn't mean it's low yielding every year. We want to identify it. We can look at the raw yield data, and if we make some assumptions about what our cost of production are and about how much we got for that crop. And Paul has an app now to do this, that you can actually change that for yours. You can figure out what proportion of your field was not making money. And you can see that part of the field. Does that happen every year? No, it doesn't. Some years where you have a really good year, you make money on every square acre of that field. But in some years you don't. So you can do it there. So that can do that. However, that's only for the fields that we have yield maps for. What we really want the yield maps for is to train up a machine learning model like we did in our other examples, to train up satellite, to use satellite imagery properly. And if there's anything you remember from this talk, remember this, that satellite imagery on its own can't tell us anything definite. We need to have ground reference data to tie it to it in order to predict something. So in this case, we're using the yield maps along with the crop type that was grown there. I showed you this already. We're using digital elevation maps and satellite imagery to make a model. And I'll go through it here. We want to know where the stable and unstable parts are. But first, to be able to do that, we have to be able to draw borders around our fields. And that's what Tuan Ha and our group did. He figured out a method to automatically draw borders around fields and to draw borders around the sloughs and around the trees so that we're not using the NDVI of the trees and the perennial vegetation in there. So we can just use the crops. We're doing that automatically. We're using things like the NDVI varying over time that I showed you before, that kind of characteristic phenology up and down. And basically the areas that have more vegetation over a longer period of time tend to have higher yield. Is that always, do we know the exact yield? No, we don't know the exact yield from that because we don't know how many seeds went in there. In some years, not all the seeds go in, but the areas that are green or longer almost always have higher yield. So we're able to use this to locate our areas of low productivity. We're using NDVI. And so our model, we're also using predictors from, we're using digital elevation models, a TandemX, a German model. Alberta is actually, all of Alberta has been surveyed with LiDAR. And we have the 15 meter map that we can use for Alberta. So it's not bad for our digital elevation map. So that's important because you can tell which areas where the water runs to and areas that have thinner soil, which will affect the productivity. And so we can figure out our landscape position, our areas that are the blue areas, the valleys where water would tend to go to, and our areas that the upper slopes, like the shoulders, the red areas, and the black areas, the peaks. We put that all together. This can give us time series predicted yields. We put all that data together. We crunch it all together. This is obviously, we use a lot of data. We use these Copernicus high performance computers at the University of Saskatchewan to run these analyses. And what it does is it gives us yield predictions for individual fields and within individual fields. And here's an example for canola here, and you can see the higher yielding ones are darker than others. This is just on kind of a field basis. And here's on the canola and the wheat. And here's our model fits. Our model fits aren't perfect. Wheat tends to be better. We have R squared of about 0.54. In some years, we can get up to about 0.86. In 2020, it was really good. We're getting better at this. It's never going to be perfect, though. It's not going to be perfect. One problem is that yield maps aren't perfect to start with. So we're starting with an imperfect data source to try to tie to. But as well, a satellite image can't see how many seeds a plant produces, but we can get a good idea of the relative productivity. And if we look at this one field here at 4 years of yield maps, where red is lower, we can see in this upper horn in the northeast corner, this area tends to always be low yielding. And if we look at it over time and look at that and classify the stability of that thing, we can see that this area is kind of a stable, low yielding area. Most of the field is a stable, high yielding area. That's great. That means that's areas. But the areas that are red are the areas that tend to be lower than the rest. The yellow areas, the unstable areas, we call these the flip-flop areas. They're good in some years, bad in other areas. And often they're the low spots that in the wet years, they'll flood out, and then the dry year and have no crop, but in the dry years, the snow melt will run into them and they'll have more moisture and produce more there. So these areas are very difficult to manage, but the areas that are stable, low, that's something we can do Are all fields consistent like this? No, they're not. Not all fields are consistent. This is one thing we're doing with WGRF is we're using this method to try to determine what fields are prime candidates for variable rate nutrient management in Western Canada. That's another one of our latest projects. We're using the same data and approach to do that because not all farms are going to be the best candidates for variable rate fertilizer. Some will be better than others, and some are going to be probably best just to manage it on a per field basis for fertilizer, not to bother with zoning them. And so that's that one there. Here you can see we can take this all the way to profit. As you can see here, if we do some assumptions about profit, we see this area is not very profitable. So that would make that could be an area that possibly something could be done to. Maybe put in perennial grasses, which would help deal with the salinity if that's what's managing, what's bothering it, etc. Well, I'm getting low on thing here, so I'll talk about my vision. Our vision, what we're working on now in the lab, is to map every field in Western Canada at 10-meter pixel level. We're creating a digital twin. We want to see how stable that spatial variability is in time, and I've talked about some of the uses there. We're doing more than that. We've created a precision agriculture certificate at the University of Saskatchewan where undergraduate students are taking courses and learning how to do this stuff. We're hoping that these kids go away and like the people that learned to weld in times of past and went back home and built some crazy, wonderful air seeders in their shop. We're trying to train the next generation of people that are going to go back and use a computer to make big differences on agriculture in Western Canada. We're doing this on the graduate level as well, keep training graduate students in collaboration with computer science. Our college is also hiring 5 new professors in digital agriculture. We've already hired 2 of them. Kubina Nikedia, who works with my group, is now going to be an assistant professor. Chantal Chizin is working in digital soil mapping. And we're also going to be hiring people in digital animal production, ag econ, and food safety as well. Finally, we had some big news a couple of weeks ago. Nutrien just gave us a big donation there. And one of the big things that they want us to do with this money is to start up a center of sustainable and digital agriculture here at my university, University of Saskatchewan. So you're seeing the beginning of what I think is going to be a huge push in Western Canada. And we're looking to establish Western Canada as the center for sustainable digital agriculture, just like we have of establishing it for the Center for No-Till Agriculture to be world leaders in this area. I think I went a little bit over time, but that's it. I hope people are out there still listening to me. Take care.
Thank you very much, Steve.
I'll take some questions if I can get some.
We did have some questions, but I will catch up with you after to get them answered for a quick little article to go out next week for all of the Slido questions we missed. We appreciate you adjusting and joining us on Zoom here. I hope you feel better soon. And from everyone in the audience, we'd like to thank you for this brilliant presentation.
Okay, great. I hope it came through okay.